My name is Tara Sparks. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for the school district, and I welcome you to our Year of Parent Speaker Series. So these have been really exciting opportunities for us to be able to connect with our community twice a month on Tuesdays in order to share with you some of the work around the district and to be able to engage in conversations that we really hope are supportive for you as parents and community members. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists. I'm going to start with Jonica Turner. John Turner is our area coordinator for special education at Lindbergh High School. She also serves as our equity and diversity coordinator currently. We also have Tiffany Davis, who is one of our instructional design coaches. She works at Crestwood Elementary. The two of them are going to moderate tonight's panel discussion. And then our panelists are Dr. Eric Cochran, high school principal, Jonathan Riethmeyer, high school counselor and department chair, Rob Dregge, one of our teachers. He teaches driver's education, Miranda Gelvin, our honors coordinator at the high school, Lisa Manson, one of our social studies teachers at the high school, Marcus Brooks, our school resource officer at Lindbergh High School, and Lexi Weitzel, another one of our social studies teachers at the high school. So welcome and thank you to all of our panelists, and I'll turn it over to John.
All right. So we're going to start the PowerPoint if we haven't already, and just focus on intentions. So we should be about on slide 4. Okay, so our objective tonight and our time together is to model some of the things that we've been doing as a district and as a staff members in our respective buildings. Model discussing our identities, diversity, justice, and action. What we're really trying to focus on here is an opportunity for us all to reflect on how different identity markers in our lives, the different things that we hold dear, how those affect our ability to do our job, our perspectives, and what impact that might have on decisions that we make and how we interact with other people. To prepare for tonight, if we can move to slide 6. So to prepare for tonight, we all completed what's called our a little identity exercise so that we could identify what pieces of our identity we most align with or we most associate with, has the most effect on us. So I'm going to put that inside of the chat, maybe, so that you all have it if you like, and if not, I'll send it out later. But it'll be a great opportunity for you guys to maybe participate in a way with us. If we're not able to send that out, you can take a look at the screen in front of you and maybe pick out some things that you most align with at this moment in your life. Can we go to slide 7? So the first question for the panelists is which would you say are your top 3 identity markers, and which specific life experiences make those so prominent for you?
I'll go ahead and start. For me, I'm just going to go ahead and pick one. I'm going to talk about education just briefly in my life, and that does stem from personal experience. My 2 grandmothers growing up did not have a high school education. My paternal grandmother, she didn't even finish 8th grade. She got married early. She never drove a car, and I remember as a young child kind of questioning that, like, Grandma, why can't you drive? My maternal grandmother also did not finish high school, got married, had children, and she had always told me, I wish I could be a high school teacher. So that identity marker for me has driven me to be as educated as I possibly can and to try to strive to learn, whether it be on a daily basis with my students or with a degree, because that's something that I feel like I need to carry on because my grandmothers weren't able to do that.
Thanks for sharing that.
I'll jump in. Education was one of my top three as well. It's a big part of who I am. It's a big part of what I identify when I think of who I am as a person. And the other two are the two things that I think I devote most of my life to, which is my family and my profession, my job title. Education is a passion of mine, so it really truly defines every day. There's not a day that I wake up and I don't think about education and the influence that we have as educators. And then whatever time I have left, I devote to being a dad. And so those two things, plus education, are the three that probably identify me the most.
For me, the three were education as well, socioeconomic status, and marital status. With education, I've always enjoyed school. I've earned my doctorate. I love to learn. So that's been a very important role. My parents were, my mom was an educator. My dad is a pastor, or was a pastor, retired. So they both had a lot of education in their background as well. In terms of marital status, my parents are still married. They're still together. They've given me a wonderful example to emulate and live by. So that's been very important to me. And then social economic status, just, having a goal of trying to have a comfortable lifestyle. I remember back with when growing up, my mom, like I said, was a teacher. My dad was a pastor. We weren't wealthy, but we didn't go for naught. But I remember we never went out to eat a lot. Going to McDonald's was a big deal, but we never went to a sit-down restaurant or anything. Now, as a kid, didn't make a difference to me at all. I really didn't notice that. But looking back, it's something that stuck out to me. And my parents just had other priorities with their money, and we had a very happy household. And it wasn't anything that that I look back on disappointed wise or anything, but something that I wanted to change a little bit for my family and my children.
I had a really similar experience, I think, to John in a lot of ways. I put down the marital status, the socioeconomic status, and the family status. And when I approached it, I thought about what are the things that drive my daily decisions. And I thought those probably, education obviously was really important to me. I also was a son of teachers. But when I make my daily decisions about my life, it's how is this going to affect my family? How is this going to affect my marriage? And then, trying to reach those economic goals or stability that I wanted to have as well. And I'm just like John, my parents, if we ever did get to go out to eat, you only got water, right, John? You never got anything but water. So yeah, there is experiences that come from my past, but also just thinking about what affects my daily decisions. And I think those three are probably the most important from my life. And I also see where I am privileged in that those are the only three things that I am mostly concerned about.
I think the two that, okay. I think the two that really stand out to me are family and educator. I feel like my whole life that I wanted to be a teacher, and being a mom and as watching my kids grow has only made me a better educator. It's helped me want to learn more and to improve for my children. I've also recently gone back to school and modeled for them being an adult learner and how that can look like at different phases in your lives. So I feel like that family life in my educator role has been really important.
I would agree with everyone in terms of education. Yes, it's at the top of my list. And yes, I'm a daughter of two educators as well. So we have a lot of similarities in that sense. But one thing that I wrote down that was different was gender. And I think as I become more aware of how I'm raising my two daughters, it really sticks out to me, the role of, being a female and a strong female, and how I can raise my daughters to also be confident and strong and believe in themselves. So I think that that's one that kind of stuck out to me that was a little bit different.
Me, I selected education. Growing up, that was the kind of cornerstone of what my parents wanted for me, and it was something that I really didn't too much care about, to be honest. But school honestly didn't become as important for me until I went to college and I was paying for it for myself. But something I chose different was physical ability. Growing up, I was an athlete in high school and college, and once I left college and joined the military, physical ability is one of those top priorities, especially if you're going to make it through with your body intact. And same for being a law enforcement officer. There's a lot of things that require physical ability that keep you safe and keep the community safe. And it kind of extends throughout, different other facets of your life, being healthy and being able to do things with your family.
Yeah, we have a lot of commonalities. Education is obviously really important to all of us and what we do. And then we have some things that are different identity factors for us, like our gender or physical ability or social economic status. So how have your identity markers really influenced your perspective on your life, on your community? What does this look like for you?
So with education, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
With education, I mentioned before how education wasn't really important to me until I went to college and was paying for it for myself. I kind of personally, I struggled through high school, and that was more of a product of me not having a great interest, as compared to some of my classmates or some of my other family members. But when I went to college, I realized how some of my disinterest in high school kind of slowed me down as far as being able to keep up with some of my peers doing as well as I wanted to do in college. So probably, my learning curve was a little bit steeper than others, but around the time that I hit my junior, senior year in college, I really had the practice of learning, down pat. And so my senior year of college, I actually volunteered with St. Louis University, and I acted as like a peer mentor for freshmen coming in because I wanted to mentor those students to understand that, taking the time and learning this stuff freshman year, taking the time and learning best practices for education, for how to spend your free time, how to stay physically fit, and how one affects the other, and your success in college was really important.
For me, education has really influenced my perspective in terms of it's, in my opinion, the key to your lifestyle and social economic status. In large part, having a quality education opens up more opportunities for students and for people. So I try and work with students as a school counselor in trying to help them understand the value of that and look beyond tomorrow or next week, but more long-term in terms of the goals they want to do and how education can help attain those goals. So that's how it's really influenced my perspective.
I'll go off road here a little bit just to shake things up and not actually talk about the things that I tend to use as when I think about my own identity as I go through my day, but also to acknowledge the fact that as I've gotten older and as I've studied more since we are talking about equity here, and I've learned a lot about the role that race and gender and different aspects of a person's identity can shape their perspective. I've become more conscious of, I would say, the fact that while I don't think that I have really thought about those things necessarily as I've navigated through my life, I don't know that I really necessarily thought, oh, wow, well, I'm a man or I'm white. I recognize that there are those who see that when they see me, that's the identity that they perceive when they meet me, and that some of those things have maybe been I guess something that never stood in my way. I think there are a lot of people who try to navigate this world where those identities may be the first thing that they notice, and I think that maybe I don't think anybody looked at me and said, well, that person's a white person, so therefore that is something that might be a barrier to them, whereas that might be something they identify in other people. So I have to acknowledge that I've learned a lot more about those aspects of my identity that I didn't necessarily think about as I was moving through life, that may have given me a path that other people might not have had.
And I would echo that too. I through the work we've done the last few years and just the awareness, because that's where it all has to start. I think of myself, I hit the jackpot. When you talk about life, I had very little difficulties because I am a cisgendered, heterosexual, white male who was extremely able-bodied. I went to college like Marcus on a scholarship. I had a full scholarship. I walked away from college without debt, which put me so far ahead socioeconomic wise. I had a degree in my hand. I just, the doors that were automatically open to me, I didn't realize at the time. And so when we talk about perspective now, especially as an educator, I can see my experience, and it allows me to see how not everyone else has that easy experience. I think before I really got into the equity work and learned about myself and where I'm at, I didn't see how, I had that assumption that everybody else was in the same life as I have. Everybody else had, as long as they do the same work or work hard, they'll have the same opportunities. And now I can see that, no, I hit a jackpot. I had the trifecta. I had it all, and some students have to work harder or just don't even have the open door sometimes that I had, or, they're dealing with things that I never even imagined dealing with at a teenage level, that even as an adult, I think I would struggle dealing with. And so from a perspective standpoint, it really allows me, I think, to have a whole lot more empathy, a lot more patience with students, and just trusting that what they're saying is the truth when they're talking about, hey, I need time for this paper. I need time for this assignment. Hey, people have real life struggles. And I didn't realize that because I had such an easy road of it.
I think I didn't share my markers, but one for me, a huge one in my life has been ability, definitely race, but definitely ability in my day-to-day. And I've been lucky to not have any diagnosis, educational or learning disabilities that would prohibit me from accessing the general education. One of the things that had saved me in terms of opportunities is my ability academically. And so in my work with special education, I'm reminded daily that is a definite privilege. And sort of a big part of my identity is balancing out that privilege with how I present to the world, with my Blackness. So in my day-to-day profession, I am really aware and grateful of my abilities, and I try to leverage that for other people, but I'm also aware of the fact that other people might look at me a little bit differently because of the color of my skin.
John, I realized I didn't share mine either. So my three are race and family and education. And race for me, I think John and I have talked a little bit about this, is a little bit different because I'm Black, but I'm light skinned, so things look different for me and how I experienced life in Lindbergh specifically, but just in the world in general. I feel like it sometimes is a little bit easier for me to assimilate or to be a part of conversations or make others feel comfortable. And that shows up all the time in my perspective of like how I'm looking at conversations I have with teachers and families and administration, and also what it looks like for students that see me in my building and what they recognize when I'm able to connect with them on a different level that might not be something that their teachers have. We talked a little bit about how these show up for us at work. So I think we can go to the next slide. And as we're thinking about diversity, like thinking about your own top 3 identity markers, how do they help or challenge you when you interact with people with different identity markers?
You can go to the next slide. And the next slide.
So I'll go on this one. And I know this is kind of one of the questions in the Q&A, so I kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone here. Growing up, I wouldn't say it's obvious, but I think it is kind of obvious. Being aware of my race was one thing that was kind of prevalent to me. In middle school, grade school, I attended predominantly Black schools. So there was nothing I really thought about. But when I went to high school, I transitioned to a private school, which was mostly white. And so at that point, I kind of realized that I was different, and it kind of made me a lot more self-aware of my race in general. Now, kind of fast forward through college and through my professional career with the military and law enforcement, having that self-awareness and being able to grow out of, fear of being different from other folks kind of led me into wanting to learn about other groups. And so that's kind of relates back to education. If you have a curiosity, you're going to seek answers about something. So with law enforcement, is really critical for, police officers to be able to interact with people with all different kind of identity markers and to try to come to a common ground so we can achieve the best possible outcome for everybody involved. For me, I feel like having done that early on, even prior to joining the police, during my time in the military, we come across and work with people from all different backgrounds. And I think that's, I was really fortunate to be able to experience that. And it helped me a lot and to be able to understand other person's, particular stories, backgrounds, and being able to relate with those individuals and, use that experience moving forward when dealing with the general public.
To kind of segue a little bit into the classroom, if we could, and really to talk about race in social studies classes and education. So I won't tell you how long I've been teaching, but it's been a long time. And the way that I was taught history and the way that I initially taught it to my students was more, hey, we're going to focus on the big events, the wars, the important things that happened, and we really didn't focus on the people. And when we focused on people, it was more people in power. It was white people. And through my work and many others in the social studies department, we are focusing more on social justice. And we're finding out that there are so many stories to be told in history where everyone has a story. And why American history is amazing and it's exciting to teach and learn about is that it's an inspiration that we're going to have this democracy and we're going to guarantee rights for our citizens. And a lot of times we would do that on paper, but in reality, people in our country did not have rights for so long. Just to give you just a quick example, how I've taught, maybe 10 years ago, I would focus and we would talk about the 19th Amendment. And I would, do a big celebration. It would be like, yes, women can vote. But upon further examination of the study of history, that wasn't true. It was white women. That's who it included. So when I was teaching that to my students, students of color and all students didn't realize that didn't occur. And oftentimes history was so compartmentalized that you were like, okay, now we're going to talk about people of color during the civil rights movement, like they didn't impact things before. So now, for example, when I talk about the fight for suffrage, we'll include the fight that white women did, but we'll also include, people like Mary Church Terrell and the National Association of Colored Women, who not only had to fight against Jim Crow, racial discrimination, but also tried to help those white women get the 19th Amendment, but themselves didn't get to vote until the 1960s. So definitely history and how we teach it is changing, and it has been changing at Lindbergh.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that just a little bit. I teach contemporary issues, and one of the skills that we're working on throughout the entire year is just to learn how to be empathetic to other people that aren't like you. And so to bring stories in from refugees or immigrants or somebody who is a different race than you, or somebody who is, identifies with a sexual orientation than you. And so to bring about those stories and foster empathy so that you can at least step into somebody else's shoes and understand what that feels like, even though that's maybe not how you've grown up or lived your life.
I'll talk for a second about something that I know has been a big learning piece for me as an educational leader in this district. And I know that probably several administrators have faced this issue before, but a couple times in the time that I've been principal, I've had situations that have come up where I've been dealing with a person of color who has a concern, and I would always go into those situations trying to address the concern just on the basis of everything, like I tried to do with everything. It's just I'm just going to focus on the problem and let's try to solve the problem. And sometimes those situations would lead to a parent making a comment where they would say, this school is racist, because they weren't happy with the situation or the outcome. And I hope I've grown in the area of recognizing what those individuals are bringing to the table, which is an experience of dealing with systems that do have a lot of embedded racism in those systems that probably, means that I need to get down and really understand, what their perspective is and then how to make sure I'm serving that family, because my job is to make sure I'm serving every family of this district and trying to make sure that they have access to a great education. And my initial reaction to that is probably the same initial reaction that many people would have when confronted with that kind of comment, which is, no, we're not racist. This has nothing to do with race, because I probably became defensive and said, if you're saying the school is racist, then you're probably saying that I'm racist because I'm the head of the school. And I've had that conversation again with parents, and I've really tried to set that aside, that reaction aside, and make sure that I'm trying to have a dialogue with what is it about our school that you think could be better? And what can we do to make you feel like you belong here and that this is not a place where you have to have an uphill battle in order to get what you need for your family? Because in general, I think most of our parents are exactly the same. They want a great education and a better future for their kids. And I've tried to become cognizant of the fact that we, as a school, as a district, like almost every other aspect of society, we're flawed. We are a product of years of history in this country, and therefore we need to try to identify those flaws within our system to ensure that we are indeed treating every kid with that same opportunity.
I know one thing that's been really interesting for me as I've done more work with equity and understanding myself is that I am a graduate of Lindbergh High School. So I knew nothing but Lindbergh for a very long time. And so I just knew the path that I was on. So as I went through school, I saw a lot of students like me, and I don't know that I ever thought about it too much. And then as we started to dive more into this work and realizing how your lens changes over time and how important it is to understand how the different identity markers help to bring more to the table, I just think that's really helped me as an educator to understand my students more and to work through, like Dr. Cochran said, challenging times. So I really appreciate that these types of conversations are on the table and celebrating the differences and parts of people rather than just focusing on ourselves.
I think recognizing, I have my own top 3 identity markers, but I have identity markers in general. And again, just recognizing that I have those has allowed me to see that other students have their individual equity or identity markers, that I see students more now as individuals versus the collective group of all the students, and they all must think like this, and they all need to work like this, they all need to do it like this. Where now I look at, this student has their individual talents and their own individual strengths and weaknesses, and how do I help them overcome their weaknesses? How do I play into their strengths, even if it's just from an assignment standpoint? This student isn't going to be capable of doing it this way for a variety of reasons, or this student's going to react to a conversation with me differently because they don't see me the same as another student sees me. And so that just that individual nature of treating all students with dignity. Everyone has their own dignity, everyone has their own story, everyone has their own identity, and I have to slow down and recognize that before I do anything else, before any other interaction or education of that student. I've got to recognize that they have their own identity first.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for myself, that's been huge. And it's also been an opportunity for me to reflect on my 3rd, which is I am from New York. And so I am kind of brash in a lot of ways. I'm very East Coast, and I am in the middle of America right now. And I am very aware of that. And when I'm dealing with anyone who is not from the East Coast, I can come off a bit abrasive. And so I'm aware of that. And I know that I have to try to include some of the niceties that I've picked up here at Lindbergh High School in my interactions with the general public and my students. And I think in terms of just really thinking about ability and pushing that out into the classroom, pushing that out into the communities, with kids that are in programs and kids that have special education and programs at the high school in particular, we have things like lunch buddies. So kids learn about other students who may not have the same abilities as they do, and they really latch onto each other and they try to make connections. And you see them connecting outside of school at times, way before COVID. but you do see those things happening. You see them eating lunch together. You see them at dances together. And really like being conscious of ability and conscious of integration for me has pushed me to be able to just kind of put myself out there and encourage kids to put themselves out there.
I know for me, my mind is constantly thinking from an elementary lens, which is very different than most people in our panel. And I know often these conversations seem really overwhelming for young people, but even like young 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, like they can have these conversations with about their identity and about skin tone and just be able to talk about who they are as people because they notice those things about one another and how they're the same and how they're different. So these are conversations that are absolutely can happen in elementary and should be happening in elementary so that when we're having these deeper conversations with students, it's not the first time that they're having them in the high school.
So I think we can move on to slide 13. So I can start. I think in my professional life, this shows up all the time. I feel like if it were not a part of my, my professional life, I would not be employed as I am a special educator. And the IEP is truly the great equalizer for students who have disabilities, similar to the 504. And so it shows up in my life all the time. And I think just advocating for kids, making sure that they have what they need to be in the general education setting, that they're able to really engage with their same age peers. So for me, it does come up quite often, ability, and it definitely affects my lens because I'm consistent. Every time I walk into a room, I think about the width of the door. I think about who can get in, who can get out, who's included, who's not included. I think I look at the assignments. I look to see if I would be able to navigate that room independently if I had difficulties with reading, with vision, with communication. So it is definitely plays a role in my life, that particular identity marker.
And going along with John and I work very closely together. I work with all students at the high school that have IEPs, and very similarly, trying to be an advocate for those students. And when issues come up or problems come up, trying to think outside of the box and coming up with solutions, because there's not a one size all fits all solution sometimes. Sometimes you have to get creative and do things that might not be the same for another student, but is good for that particular student. So that's where it primarily comes up in the school setting for me. And the other thing I find is oftentimes when trying to do these types of solutions, I find it very valuable to try and talk to a teacher in person, face to face, as opposed to via an email. And I think that helps with empathy and getting a point across when you're talking to somebody face to face. Now, with COVID going on, it's more difficult to do that with parents, but with teachers, that's something that I try and do to help out in getting some understanding and empathy from a teacher in regard to a student.
So I think for my role as a law enforcement officer and a school resource officer, I mean, Lindbergh High School is not the first school district I worked at. Previously, prior to coming to Lindbergh, I worked as a Hazelwood school resource officer. And having worked in both communities for a little bit of time now, I would tell you that injustice in regards to law enforcement doesn't have to be specifically related to the criminal justice system, especially when it comes to SROs. You know, our job is to, you know, kind of act as guidance counselors first for students who are having issues, and then, you know, act under the color of law if it's absolutely necessary. So with that being said, you know, being just and preventing ourselves from being unjust, you know, kind of looks like, am I doing as much as I can to guide this student out of a bad situation and put them in the most advantageous situation possible? And if we're not doing that equally for each student, or if we're picking and choosing which students we do that for, then that qualifies as a form of inequity and injustice. So, you know, with the guys that we work with, you know, we all train to, you know, do our best to use community-oriented solutions to try to help students. And, you know, it's important for us as law enforcement officers, as school resource officers, to do that for all of the students that we come in contact with.
I think in the time that we have left, we might want to move on to our action. So you can go to the next slide.
Slide 16.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks. So what parts of your current job duties most lend themselves to standing up for exclusion and prejudice and injustice? And I know for myself that as an instructional coach, that curriculum and instruction is really important to me, and making sure that we're hearing all voices and seeing all voices in the curriculum that we're doing specifically in elementary, but as a collective in Lindbergh, and really being mindful of who is who's telling the narrative, and then whose voices are being left out of that narrative. In social studies, in our literacy, and even thinking about how do we support our students that aren't our English as second language learners.
In working with IEP students, John Turner and I kind of work as a team. Oftentimes, this year we've done home visits together. We've talked to students together, and I like being able to do that just because we look at things sometimes from a different perspective in how to reach a student or a family. And when we can kind of tag team and complement each other in working and coming up with some solutions. So that's one thing I really appreciate in working with John Turner at the high school with our IEP students, because I know I trust her, and I know she brings a lot to the table and will bring things that I may not think of. And I'd like to think that she thinks the same about me, where together we can be even more successful in working with students and families.
As a part of the high school honors program, one thing that has always been really important to me is equal access for all students to our honors classes. And that can mean different things, whether that's ability in the classroom as it pertains to our IEP students or EL students, or even socioeconomic access. AP exams and the IB program can be very expensive programs, and we create opportunities for all students to be a part of all of those programs regardless of needs. So that's something we work very hard, is to make sure that throughout all 4 years in high school, for the honors program, that students have access to whatever courses they would like to take.
I live in the past for sure. In fact, I can mention to my husband, hey, remember that thing you did 15 years ago? But I think living in the past is really important for inclusion, for equity, for diversity, not just of this school, but of this community and our country. And I think it's really important for us as social studies teachers, but for all of us to, look in the past and see how that affects current events, our daily lives. And if we can do that, I think we'll have more empathy and understanding.
As just a general classroom teacher, I mean, I could go into so many details about little things here and there that come up, but they do make a difference. I think about the fact that at the beginning of the school year or the beginning of the semester, when I introduce myself to the students, I introduce myself as Coach Draghi, a cisgendered heterosexual male. And it's a small thing like that that allows students who may be in a minority group to feel more included in that classroom, to feel safe in my classroom, from something as simple as attaching that to my introduction, my name, so they don't feel like being something different will make them stand out as much in the classroom. They will feel safer within that environment. It's just the small things we can do on a daily basis that help students feel included.
I give a little wait time just in case somebody else wanted to jump in, but I'll jump in now. I see all of this as something that sits on my shoulders when it comes to representing the school, when it comes to trying to make this a place that truly serves the needs of every single student to the best of our ability. And it is a daunting task. I mean, we have 2,200 kids at the high school alone. I'm just talking about the high school here. And every single one of them has different needs. And that is a very challenging thing for us to address as a school, to try to make such a large school intimate enough, small enough where we can make sure that every student feels welcome, every student feels included, and every student is getting what they need in order to be successful. But how long is this webinar? I could probably talk for an hour. There are so many things that I think that we can be doing just at the high school to try to address some of these issues. One of them, of course, is trying to find a teaching staff that reflects our student body, our student population, so that when students come here, they see faces and they see models of what they can become. One of the biggest challenges, I would say, that I have as an administrator is confronting prejudice and injustice, especially overt prejudice when it is put on display in our high school. We deal with teenagers. They make mistakes. They do things that teenagers have been doing for decades, which is they say things that are hurtful and harmful to other people. And there is a visceral reaction to those things when they happen. And I often get that feedback that student should not be in our school, or that student should just be disciplined, massive discipline. And discipline is certainly a part of that conversation, but it is far more nuanced than that. I mean, this is a place of education. And so if we have a student who's displaying prejudice, to me, the easy thing is simply to say, well, this is your punishment. Now you go think about what you did. The hard thing is to dig into that and try to help that student become a better version of themselves. Whenever we have something, especially something that's high profile, as many schools end up having at some point in time, that involves racial prejudice or crimes against women or anything that could impact a specific group. I think it's really important that we think about what we want our school to represent. We get a lot of comments like, was that who you are as a school? And my reaction to that is often, well, that's part of who we are. But I don't think that represents the majority of who we are, but we are a reflection of society. And so if we want society to improve, we need to focus on improving our little part of that, because these are young people and they make mistakes. And to me, it's our charge, our responsibility when something like that happens, to try to understand them, not to just simply cast them aside, but to work with them and hope that when they leave us, that they were better than when they got here.
I think a small thing that a lot of adults in general might tend to undervalue is their presence as a teacher, as a mentor, as an adult. I think for a lot of us, we all have that one teacher in high school or grade school that we remember, as a standout among other teachers who talked to us or gave us mentorship, who told us something, kind or something that was powerful that we remember later on, that we say, I really didn't think that was important then, but I think it's important now. So, using your position as a mentor, as an educator, as law enforcement, principal, counselor, what have you, to mentor kids, while they may not respond to it right away. I mean, you have to remember, even as parents, that what we say will definitely affect our children and the students long term. So we really have to, like Dr. Cochran says, take the time to kind of mentor these students and provide perspective that they will grasp later on, hopefully. If they can grasp it immediately, that's the best possible outcome. But at the very least, we can try to affect change in the long term. And that's the greater goal.
Thank you. I want to, Tony, if you could turn to slide 19. And I want to share some resources with the group here, but tonight was really for us to model to the community the type of I guess you could say, civil discourse or equity related conversations that we have as a collective. And to give you guys maybe some ideas about things you can do with your families. And so when we talked about identity, I think a lot of people mentioned things about their identities that didn't have anything to do with race, that didn't have anything to do with politics or anything like that. But I think we did latch on to some things that were really important for us. And so learning about our individual stories is a really good foundation when we're talking about equity. So you could do things like just going over your family traditions with your kids, exploring the meanings behind their names. There are some hyperlinks here. Tony, if you could just click on where it says first and last names, just hover over it. It should, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I'll send that out to you guys either way. You could go over maybe how your kids got their names, maybe go over some family artifacts, things like that. There are some other things you can do for diversity. This is my favorite one. I don't know if you've seen me in my entirety, but I like to eat. And so cooking is a great way to really, and low stakes way to get to know about other people's cultures. So you can look some things up online, then maybe go to the Global Foods Market in Kirkwood, right down the block on Lindbergh. I'm aware of it, they're aware of me. And you can go there, they'll take good care of you. You can also travel around the world and also travel around, especially during Black History Month, to some of our Black History museums throughout the United States of America for free, through Google Arts and Culture app and website. And then something that came up several times throughout our conversation was really empathy and perspective. So teaching your kids those words, helping them to understand what that means to them on their level would be great. And then action. This is something that I feel is such a part of the Lindbergh community as a whole, inside of the schools and outside of the schools, is just that community feel and the community service. And so really being purposeful about that and aligning your family's identity, goals, values with the social and community services that you guys do as a family. These are really great websites. They have ways you can do community service from your home during the time of COVID, and I would recommend them. I also want to offer to you all what we use to guide our discussion today and what we're using to guide a lot of the work that we do in Lindbergh in terms of equity and inclusion with our students and staff are the standards from Teaching Tolerance. And they have them set up for grades K through 2, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. And I'm going to share a link with Tony, and he's going to share it out to the group, to the community, with resources in each of these areas for kids underneath those age categories or grade levels, so that you guys can maybe take some of the stuff that we've done tonight, if you're comfortable, and do those things with your family.
John, are you ready for me to address a couple of things that came up in the Q&A?
I'm not sure. What came up?
I think most things we really talked about. There were some questions around elementary, and I think you just referenced with the Teaching Tolerance standards and the work around empathy. I know, and Tiffany, please feel free to jump in. You touched base on this earlier, talking about social studies curriculum and English language arts curriculum. But there's been a concerted effort within our schools to really ensure that students have both mirrors and windows, so that students are seeing themselves reflected in the resources that they have within their learning experiences, and also getting the opportunity to see out into other experiences, other perspectives. So that's been really important for us as we integrate literature in our younger grades, and then all the way up through high school, obviously. And a lot of work around social emotional learning. When we talk about students and their own self-awareness, identity falls into that. Building empathy is a huge part of our end outcomes for our students, as John just referenced. So weaving those into classroom meetings is an important part of ensuring that our kids are successful in understanding how they learn and how they work, but also working together with their classmates. Collaboration is a skill we know that our kids need to master to be successful in life. So we give them the tools to do that, and that starts with understanding who they are and who the people around them are. Tiffany, anything that you wanted to add to that?
I think I just want to add that these conversations do not have to be super long and like really in depth. These are conversations that can be like really like 5 to 10 minute or just like quick chats that you're having with kids about things that they often bring up really organically. So I think sometimes that can be really overwhelming for especially elementary teachers who are often concerned about like how much time they have and how much of their time is being taken up by other things. So it is like a real concern that I know can feel overwhelming. So be thinking about like conversations in the hall, or anytime that you're just like chatting one-on-one with a student, those conversations can still happen.
And just to add on to that, conversations in the hall, what you're mentioning there, Tiffany, Rob, you brought it up earlier, understanding your students as individuals. This is relationship work. When we develop great relationships with our students, we build their ability to be successful in school and in life beyond Lindbergh. So that's always a goal, and that's the baseline for our work. The other question I think is really worth discussing as a group. There's a question about the difference between equity and equality and how that works within our schools and then beyond our schools, outside of the school environment. I think one specific example that I know I would like to share, and then if any of our panelists would like to add, we've done a lot of work around technology as a district in order to ensure that our students have access to computers. And it's a simple thing, it's a little thing, but we ask that every student has insurance. Now the equal thing would be to charge every student the exact same dollar amount for their insurance in order to make sure that their devices are protected and they have access to continue using them. However, the equitable thing is to really pay attention to the socioeconomic needs of our families. The families who can't afford the full $20 fee, then that is our expectation. But we know that there are families on free and reduced lunch who have limited financial means. We know that some families are not going to be able to afford it at all. So we work with those families to ensure that they get what they need. And hotspots are another example, being able to offer hotspots to families who did not have Wi-Fi. That's not equal for everyone, but it's equitable to make sure our kids have access. Does anyone want to share some examples of things in the classroom or that you've experienced there?
I think you can just take it from a general standpoint. I always picture the comic or the graphic of the students trying to look over the fence. And equal, they all have the same box. Equitable, they all have a box big enough that they all see over the fence. You know, from a simple thing as I can present the lesson to every kid and they all get the equal lesson. But because every student has their own abilities and their own backgrounds, you know, trying to differentiate that or modify an assignment for a student who can't or has dyslexia, maybe I provide them another resource to use. You know, that's an example of equity, trying to help each student get the lesson, get the content at their level versus just giving them all the same thing.
I would just say that for me, I mean, equality in schools, like if somebody comes from the mindset that we should be treating every kid exactly the same, that doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's no way that we can accomplish what I mentioned before, which is to individualize things and to serve our kids to the best of our ability if we are simply a processing center that kid does this, we do this. This is true in discipline. You know, if you want to start thinking about some of the issues related to equity and inequity within schools, it's discipline. And I know that many who don't work in schools will often immediately say, well, you know, you have a discipline code and you should follow that discipline code. Well, a robot could do that. That's not our objective. Our objective is to educate kids. And each one of those kids and each one of those discipline cases is coming from a different place, a different circumstance. And so the first thing we need to do is try to figure out where that kid's coming from and then try to address it based on the needs of that individual child. And I think you could apply that to almost any aspect of what we do, whether it be discipline, whether it be needs of learning how to read or learning how to do math or anything that you see in the classroom. One of the most difficult challenges we have in a large district is just trying to find a way to make sure that we're giving the kids what they need and not some prescribed, you do this and then you get this model. So.
I agree. I think it's meeting the kids and anybody where they're at and giving them what they need in order to be included, whatever that might be, especially for our students.
And I would just add on that I think one of the biggest challenges in the classroom is knowing the students' needs to begin with. You know, so few students feel confident or comfortable enough with their teachers, whether they're elementary on up, to advocate for themselves, to share something challenging within themselves, whether it's an identity thing or whether they're having a struggle, like a immediate acute struggle, a current struggle, you know, versus something that goes on throughout their life. It's amazing when I find out something from a student, how often I have that, when I step back moment, like, okay, let's deal with this and we'll worry about that assignment later, you know. But until I know that, it's hard for me to meet them where they need to be met. And so, you know, as parents, you know, I'm trying to do that with my own young kids, but teaching them to advocate for themselves, teaching them to feel comfortable, at least with someone, find someone on the staff, if not all your teachers, to share difficulty so that they can then go ahead and meet you. Because if they don't know your difficulty, they can't address it. They can't help you with it.
And not so I think I agree with you, Rob. I think that knowing your difficulties, but also just knowing your story. So one of the things to me, like when we were organizing this, I felt was so important is that we all have stories to tell. And every single one of us has an identity that's just as important as the other ones, right? And so even if you don't have difficulty in the classrooms necessarily, you might have strength that you can lend to other people in the classroom or other people in your community to lift them up. So letting kids know, hey, I see that you're strong in this area, and I also see that you can support your classmate in this area. Show me how you do that. And I think that to me is super duper powerful. And we can really only do that when we listen to each other, when we know our students, and when we know ourselves.
All right, well, we are past time for tonight. So I just once again want to thank John and Tiffany for moderating tonight's conversation. Thank you to all the panelists for being a part of this. And for those of you who are still with us, this will be shared out along with the resources in your upcoming school emails. So thank you all.